To be Armenian is to have an awareness of your history and to have that sense of identity. I don't believe music and the Armenian identity can be separated. Not only did it provide them with joy and entertainment, but I believe it also had a great deal to do with their own survival. It was the song that you sang to ask God to make it rain so that you could eat. We had music in the church which kept our sanity as a focus on what to hope for and pray for and to be relieved of. At the same time, we have songs that celebrate the joy of life. And I think of the Dikranagerdsis who party hard and mourn hard, like these extremes of emotions, and music was always there for them. Folk music is anonymous. We don't know the authorship of the folk songs, but rather we can determine where it's from geographically. You can tell a Black Sea melody versus an Eastern Anatolian melody because the land gives it that flavor, similar to the clothes that the people wear or the food that they eat or even the architecture. Armenian folk music is monophonic, meaning everybody plays the melody. Harmony is a European concept. Harmony meaning 3 notes, 4 notes at one time, chords. That didn't exist in our folk music. However, once we got to America, America is a Western country, and harmony is absolutely essential to American music. So, instruments that play harmony, meaning accordion, bass, guitar, keyboard, these instruments started to creep into our ethnic music, and it started to accompany the oud and the clarinet and the kanun, etc., etc. Most of the Armenians, certainly in America, their ancestors are from Eastern Anatolia, part of the Ottoman Empire. The Armenians arrived in America, well, before the genocide, but also more and more after the genocide. After they were settled here, they had the luxury to bring music into their lives once again. And they couldn't help but be influenced by the American culture. At that time, in the 1930s, the popular music of the day was big band. For example, Benny Goodman, Count Basie, etc., etc. This was the music that the young kids heard on the radio. Those instruments or that mentality started to creep in to their parents' Armenian music when the youngsters started playing it, both in the attitude and even in the instrumentation. So suddenly you have a saxophone, you have a piano, you have an American drum set that were added to the music which would never have existed in the old country. And this developed American Armenian music, which is absolutely unique and would never be heard anywhere else in the world. And it's only a result of the American experience. The Vospigians, who are originally from Malatya, landed and settled in Philadelphia. Their sound was absolutely unique and really influenced the rest of the Armenians around the country. They had a great sense of energy. They were aware of big band music, and indeed their concerts or dances or kefs, there were many musicians on the stage and hitting big drums and saxophones, and absolutely unique Armenian music was born. The Vospigians' first recording, Shurchbar, which means round dance, it's interesting because, just to get technical for a second, they're playing this melody in 10/8, which is a very Anatolian time signature, and it sounds like this. But the truth is, the origin of the melody was originally in 6/8. They're playing a melody called Shalacho, which originally in 6/8 is like this. But they're playing it in 10/8, which is like this. Once the Armenians arrived in America, many of them did not want to sing the Turkish songs that they knew. They preferred to sing in Armenian. So instead, they started singing songs, sometimes with the same melodies from the old country, but with new lyrics. For example, Catskilin Jampan. That song actually became popular not only in the Catskill region, but throughout the country. Harsupesa, which is bride and groom. That melody is from Harpert originally, but those words were written here in America and served a great purpose. We start almost every wedding with Harsupesa. Guy Chukurian, who was a comedian, actor, musician, would take popular songs of the day and write comical Armenian words. One example is Turapats Dikran, which is a version of a popular novelty song called Open the Door, Richard. Turapats Dikran, Turapats for yes there's gone. Turapats Dikran, Dikran in Chudura Chespanan. Another incredible benefit of having landed in this country for the Armenians is that unintentionally and unknowingly, things were preserved. Dialects, and specifically dances. In the old country, each village had its own dance. As we were forced out of our lands and wound up here, there were pockets of those different villages that reoccurred here in America. The Malatyatsis were in Philadelphia. The Dikranagertsis were in Union City, New Jersey. The Palutsis were in Providence. When they would gather at a dance, the Erzurumsis, those from Erzurum, would get up and do their dance while the others watched. But eventually, they all learned that dance. And then when the Dikranagertsis got up, they did their hale, that's their dance. And everybody else watched, and they eventually learned that dance. So that after a generation, all the Armenians that were in America knew all of the village dances. This never occurred anywhere else in the world. It's an incredible thing to show that apparently the quality and the depth and the importance of this music is such that it continues generation after generation. It remains popular and part of the essential experience of being an Armenian American. As ethnic groups began to gather in various cities in America, the major record companies like Columbia and RCA Victor realized that there's a market out there that was not being met, and there was really two sources that they could draw from. They had their offices in various countries throughout the world that they could license those recordings and distribute them to those ethnic communities in America. Or, as they did, they could go to those communities, go to, let's say, the local grocery shop, and ask anybody around your community that can sing or play, and they would be told, oh, this guy has a nice voice, or that guy is a great violin player, or what have you. And they would record them. So you had music recorded both here and licensed from the old country, and it was frankly easy money for them. An example of how a recording can have such a big impact on a culture. 100 years ago, the halay was usually performed accompanied by davul zurna. The davul is a big bass drum, and the zurna is a short, very loud double reed instrument. These are outdoor instruments. Just those two instruments made a lot of sound, and people would dance. In the late 1950s, one of our great oud players, George Mugardichan, made a recording of the hale, and it was so popular and so beautifully performed with such a great groove that subsequent generations felt the hale is an oud piece. The davul zurna, since that wasn't popular here, kind of got forgotten. So there's a tremendous impact that a recording can have on a culture. In America, just as in jazz, there are the main cities, And those main, for example, jazz creators had a big impact, and then we would later define that as the West Coast sound, or the New York sound, or the New Orleans sound, but it's usually based on one or two giant musicians. And it was no different for the Armenians. On the West Coast, Richard Hagopian had his Keftime band. In Detroit, Hachi Khazarian, the clarinet player. We might call that the Detroit sound. In New York, my father, Onig Dinkджян and John Beberian. In New England, Harry Manassian and so many others. We define those sounds as the New England sound or the New York sound, but it's really based on those musicians. These recordings may not be presently appreciated, but I really believe in subsequent generations they are going to understand how priceless and precious they are. They are hard facts of who we were, what we sounded like, what was the music like, what were our dialects, what languages did we sing, where were we from. This is concrete evidence of our existence and our contributions to culture that occasionally are ignored or denied. And so the earliest examples of what our ancestors sounded like, how precious is that?